Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1581, Sense Enhancement Bead. He cast his gaze toward the origin of the golden lightning to discover that the long-haired foreign being had already emerged from his golden ball, and that a blue humanoid puppet that was around 20 feet tall had appeared beside him. The puppet was entirely blue in color, and one of its hands was raised with thin arcs of lightning flashing in between its fingers. This Xianxia had not only two high-grade puppets, but also a third one that was capable of unleashing divine Devilbane lightning. That came as quite a surprise to Han Li. However, he was only caught in a stunned stupor for an instant before flapping his wings and hurtling toward the silver battle arc as a gust of fierce winds. Azure light flashed, and his massive avian body swelled dramatically once again. Immediately thereafter, the massive bird's talons came crashing down upon the battle arc with piercing lightning flashing alongside them. The talons instantly pierced into the battle arc amid a string of resounding booms, and a massive hole was torn into its silver surface. The giant bird then opened its cavernous mouth, and a thick bolt of lightning blasted forth, disappearing into the hole in a flash. Lightning flashed, and cries of anguish rang out from within the battle arcs as countless Jiao Kai beings were slain in the blink of an eye. However, the giant bird didn't rest there. It flapped its wings downward in a violent manner, and a gust of fierce white winds swept forth. It then released the massive battle arcs, and the latter was swept up by the gale force winds before plummeting toward the ground. The battle arc crashed onto the ground amid a resounding boom, and the massive bird let loose a long cry before folding its wings away, then shrinking down to its humanoid form amid a flash of azure light. Han Li cast his gaze onto the ground down below, then made a hand seal, and several tens of small azure swords appeared in unison in the surrounding area. The swords tremored before hurtling through the streaks of azure light, making short work of the ruined battle arc down below. Han Li then turned his attention to the battle arc that he had previously felled, manipulating his flying swords to destroy that arc as well. At this moment, the armored warriors and giant falcons in the surrounding area had also almost been completely eradicated by the Weeping Soul Beast and the Leopard Kirin Beast. Only a few fortunate survivors had managed to flee into the extremely far distance, but the rest of their companions had all been slain. Han Li couldn't be bothered to send his two beasts after those beings, and he merely waved a hand through the air, upon which a black ring whizzed out of his sleeve. The massive black ape instantly shrank down and disappeared into the black ring as a streak of black light, along with the Leopard Kirin Beast, which also returned as a streak of golden light. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, and the black ring flew back to him before being stowed away. Only then did Han Li cast his gaze toward the distance where Xianxia was standing, then suddenly flew over to him as a streak of azure light. After just a single flash, he appeared around 10 feet before Xianxia in a wraith-like manner, then appraised him in a cold and expressionless manner. Xianxia's heart stirred upon seeing this, but he quickly put on a smile before cupping his fist in a grateful salute. "Thank you for saving me, Senior. I'll be sure to fulfill my promise and reward you with a sentient puppet once we return to the myriad ancient race. You sure are brave to have dared to drag me into your mess. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you right now?" A hint of killing intent surfaced within Han Li's narrowed eyes. "Surely you jest, fellow Daoist. If you had intended to do that, I'd already be dead. Besides, I only brought you into this matter as I had no alternatives, so I hope you'll forgive me, Senior," Xianxia replied with a smile. "How did you know I was nearby?" "In my own opinion, my concealment techniques are quite effective, especially against those of a lower cultivation base than myself," Han Li suddenly asked after a brief silence. Following a brief hesitation, Xianxia opened his mouth to expel an object, which landed in his hand before he offered it up for Han Li's inspection. "Of course I wouldn't have been able to detect your presence on my own. It was all thanks to this thing." Han Li focused his gaze on the item to find that it was a black and white bead with what appeared to be a series of spiritual chi vortexes swirling on its surface. "What's this?" Han Li found the item to be rather familiar somehow. "Are you unfamiliar with this item, Senior?" This sense enhancement bead is a treasure refined from the inner core of a type of a rare spirit beast known as the Nai beast. It can temporarily enhance one's spiritual sense by about twofold, but after every usage, there will be quite a few after effects, and the treasure will need to be nurtured within the user's body for many years before it recovers. However, it's extremely useful in dire situations, Jiao Qianmu explained in a truthful manner. Spiritual sense enhancement by twofold. Han Li was stunned to hear this. If this treasure were able to enhance one's cultivation base by roughly twofold, then he wouldn't be all that surprised. After all, treasures that could be used to temporarily enhance one's power were rare in the spirit realm, but not non-existence. However, this was the first time he had heard of something that could enhance one's spiritual sense in the spirit realm. One's spiritual sense normally increased along with their cultivation base as well as the cultivation arts used, so generally speaking, no treasure could affect one's spiritual sense. Sense enhancement bead.
Nie beast.
Han Li murmured to himself as a peculiar look appeared in his eyes. Jiao Qianmu's heart stirred at the sight of Han Li's expression, and he hurriedly added, however, the Nai beasts required to refine this bead are almost extinct in the spirit realm, and once a sense enhancement bead is used, it can't be used by any other person. If one were to forcibly devour a sense enhancement bead that had already previously been used by someone else, they would be driven insane due to their spiritual sense becoming overly chaotic. I see. Han Li was rather disappointed to hear this, and the hint of killing intent that had just welled up in his heart quickly faded. However, he still found the black bead to be extremely familiar. In fact, there seemed to be one in his storage bracelet. Han Li suddenly recalled back to when he had slain that unknown beast in the Devilfall Valley countless years ago. The inner core of that beast was very similar in appearance to this sense enhancement bead. Could it be that the mutant beast from back then was a Nai beast? A hint of excitement welled up in Han Li's heart as that thought occurred to him. If he also possessed a sense enhancement bead, then wouldn't he be able to unleash close to twice as many gold-devouring beetles as he'd normally be capable of? In dire situations against overwhelmingly powerful enemies, he'd be able to scare them away with his gold-devouring beetles. Despite these thoughts running through his mind, Han Li didn't ask any further questions about the sense enhancement bead as he didn't want to arouse suspicion from Jiao Qianmu. Instead, he glanced at the humanoid puppet beside them, then asked in an indifferent voice, judging from how intent the Jiao Kai beings were on capturing, you must be no ordinary being, right? How about you introduce yourself first? I'm just an upper-race third-tier being who knows a thing or two about puppet refinement, which has earned me a bit of renown in my race, Jiao Qianmu replied with a nonchalant smile. Is that so? Your puppet refinement skills must truly be extraordinary for the Jiao Kai race elders to hold you in such high regard, Han Li mused in an indifferent manner. Jiao Qianmu merely chuckled and refrained from offering a response on this occasion. Instead, he surveyed the surrounding area before a slightly concerned look appeared on his face. Senior, this is not a place that we should linger in. How about you leave with me first before we discuss any other matters? HMH, you're right about that, but I have no intention of going with you. From now on, we go our separate ways. You're such a big target, I don't want to get swept up in your mess a second time, Han Li harumphed coldly. He then twisted around, and azure light shimmered from his body as he prepared to depart. Wait. The further ahead you go, the more Jiao Kai beings you'll encounter. Even with your powers, it won't be a simple task to escape from this area. I know of a secret teleportation formation that can take us directly out of the area that has been taken over by the Jiao Kai race, Jiao Qianmu hurriedly said with an urgent look on his face. A teleportation formation? You're not lying to me, are you? The azure light radiating from Han Li's body faded as he turned to Jiao Qianmu with a surprised look on his face. Rest assured, Senior, this is a secret teleportation formation set up solely for special members of the 13 heavenly cloud races like myself. Once we get there, you'll be able to immediately ascertain the validity of my claim. If you discover that I'm lying, you can do with me as you please, Jiao Qianmu replied with a smile. Han Li fell into silent contemplation upon hearing this. It was indeed the case that he'd encountered Jiao Kai race patrols with increased regularity along his journey. As such, he really was rather confident about his chances of being able to escape from this area. If he could use a teleportation formation that would take him away from here, then that would naturally be a very attractive option. He didn't have any ties with neither the 13 heavenly cloud races nor the Xiaokai race, but the violence that the Xiaokai race had displayed in slaughtering the entirety of Greenlight City indicated to him that even if he were to surrender himself and offer up the Jade Box, there was no way that they would spare him. In contrast, it seemed that the 13 heavenly cloud races weren't as oppressive toward outsiders, so it would be a good idea to travel to their territory, then slowly try and find a way back to his original continent. Furthermore, he was carrying 2 Jade Boxes that had to be taken care of, and this Jian Qianmu seemed to be quite an important figure in the myriad ancient race, so perhaps he'd be able to help in that respect. After contemplating all these matters, Han Li nodded as his expression eased, and he said, "All right, in that case, I'll be happy to come along. Please lead the way, fellow Daoist Jiao." Jiao Qianmu was ecstatic to hear this, and he hurriedly expressed his gratitude to Han Li. The spiritual power within the few types of special spirit stones used in his puppets had been completely exhausted, so there was no way that a third-tier upper race being like him would be able to travel to the place where the teleportation formation was situated on his own. However, with Han Li's protection, he would have a far greater chance of getting to his destination without being captured or killed. Thus, Jiao Qianmu immediately rose up into the air to recover the puppets that had been taken by the Xiaokai beings, then stowed the humanoid puppet away before flying into the distance, leading the way for Han Li. 2 streaks of light, one golden and one azure, disappeared into the distance after just a few flashes. Chapter 1582. Invitation. In the air above a massive city enshrouded under a yellow light barrier, there were over 100 silver battle arcs of different sizes. These battles arcs ranged from just over 10,000 feet up to over 100,000 feet in size, and the largest of them were like small cities that hovered above the massive city. Within the largest of the battle arcs, there were a dozen or so spatial tempering stage Xiaokai beings, and they were standing inside the tallest pavilion on the arc while looking out at the city down below. On a chair behind them sat a pale-skinned young woman with a pair of purplish golden eyes. This group of beings was currently conversing in hushed tones with one another while pointing down at the massive city. The young woman wore a contemplative expression, seemingly in deep thought about something. All of a sudden, spiritual light flashed from the entrance of the pavilion, following which a streak of red light shot forth toward the young woman. The woman raised an eyebrow as she waved a hand toward the streak of light, and it transformed into a ball of red flames that fell onto her palm. She carried the ball of flames in her hand before seeping her spiritual sense into it. After a short while, her expression darkened, and she said in a cold voice, "What a bunch of useless idiots." Everyone else's hearts stirred upon hearing this, and their conversation ceased as they turned their attention to her. "What's happened, Lady Yin?" a hunchbacked man asked in a careful manner. A group of 7th-tier and 8th-tier upper race beings were deployed to capture the Jiao Qianmu, only to all be slain at the scene, and the other teleportation formation couldn't even be activated in the first place, the young woman harumphed coldly in response. "How is that possible? That Jiao Qianmu is indeed proficient in puppet refinement, but is just a mid-tier upper race being. How could he have killed all of the troops we sent after him?" Another long-faced woman asked in an incredulous manner. "According to the survivors, someone else was responsible for all this," the young woman replied with a shake of her head. "Someone else? Are there other holy race beings in the area aside from in this flowing water city?" the hunchback man exclaimed. "No, not a body integration stage being, but a 7th-tier upper race being instead. That's why I called them a bunch of useless idiots. How did so many of them lose to an opponent of the same cultivation base?" The young woman's voice cooled even further as a hint of rage flashed through her eyes. None of the other beings dared to say anything after witnessing the young woman's fury. "Send a message to Envoy 2 right away, and inform them of the site of the incident. They'll be responsible for capturing Jiao Qianmu from now on. We'll focus all our efforts and attention on conquering Flowing Water City." The young woman's words were like cold, scathing blades. "Envoy 2 has other missions to attend to. Surely he wouldn't be willing to come here," someone said in a careful manner. "Just tell him that the one who saved Jiao Qianmu is the being that he wants to capture, and he'll have no choice but to take over this mission," the woman replied as she cast an indifferent glance toward the one who had just spoken. The one who saved Xianxia is the same being that Envoy 2 wants to capture. Everyone was quite startled to hear this. All right, that's enough of this matter. What we have to do now is conquer this city within the next 3 days. After that, Golden Armor City will be completely on its own, and it'll be as good as ours when that time comes. All of you, just act according to the plan, the woman instructed. Yes, all of other high-grade Jiao Kai beings replied with respectful bows. After that, they departed from the pavilion and flew back to the battle arcs that they were operating. 2 hours later, all of the battle arcs began to shimmer with spiritual light and emit bursts of a splitting rumbling following an order from the young woman. Countless armored warriors, twin-headed giant falcons, and hundreds of winged doublons surge out of the battle arcs, forming an orderly formation in the air, surrounding the entire giant city in a watertight manner. Following the emergence of this Jiao Kai race army, a series of puppets of different colors also flew out of the battle arcs. Most of these puppets were humanoid with the smallest comparable in size to a normal person, while the largest were over 100 feet tall each. There were only 3 beastly puppets among them, and each of them were over 1,000 feet in size. One of them had the appearance of a giant turtle, but had 3 heads, and a shell that was filled with thick and sharp spikes. Another one had the body of an ape and the head of a tiger with a pair of massive golden deer antlers. The third one was a flying ant-like puppet, and not only was it the largest of the 3, its body was entirely pristine white, as if it had been refined from crystal. Seeing as the Jiao Kai beings were preparing to launch a large-scale attack, the entire city was cast into a frenzy. Through the massive light barrier, one could see that a series of formations had lit up across many locations within the city. Immediately thereafter, thick pillars of light rose up from the formations, injecting themselves into the light barrier in the air above. The light barrier instantly began to shimmer as a series of runes emerged from it, each of which was around 10 feet in size. At the same time, countless humanoid figures flew out of some of the buildings in the city, many of which immediately hurtled toward the formations that had just lit up. Attack! The young woman on the largest battle commanded, and the 3 largest beastly puppets led the charge. Spiritual light swirled around the giant turtle's shell, following which countless thick pillars of light instantly shot forth. Meanwhile, the tiger-headed ape beast opened its mouth to blast forth a golden pillar of light, within which the sounds of howling winds and explosive thunder could be heard. As for the giant crystalline ant, it also opened its mouth, but it expelled a vast expanse of dense green mist that swept through the air instead. Immediately thereafter, brilliant spiritual light radiated from the undersides of the battle arcs as pillars of light came raining down in a torrential downpour. All of a sudden, rumbling booms rang out incessantly like a relentless string of thunderclaps. Deep within the belly of a massive mountain, there was a dim hall in which everything was only barely visible. The entire area was deathly silent, and it seemed that no one had frequented this place for many years. However, a short while later, white light suddenly flashed within the hall, following which a formation that was several tens of feet in size appeared at the center of the hall. Spiritual light flashed amid a low buzzing sound, and 2 blurry humanoid figures emerged within the formation. One of them was a remarkably young man in a set of azure robes, while the other was a being with long disheveled hair that obscured half of his face. These 2 were none other than Han Li and Xianxia. This place is extremely discreet and obscure, and this teleportation formation that was constructed here by our myriad ancient race cannot be used unless it's during a crisis. As the years have passed, fewer and fewer people know about it. Where we are now is already outside of the area taken over by the Jiao Kai race, and it's only several days of flight away from the 3rd largest city of our 13 heavenly cloud races, Cloud City, Xianxia said with a smile. He then swept a hand through the air, casting an incantation seal onto a gem that was embedded onto a nearby wall. Spiritual light instantly flashed within the entire hall as a dozen or so locations on the walls lit up in unison, illuminating the entire room. Han Li inspected his surroundings to find that this hall was only just over 1,000 feet in size, and it had been entirely paved with massive stones that were azure and white in color. It appeared to be quite ordinary and mundane, but the entire place was spotlessly clean. Thus, he nodded, and said in an indifferent manner, "It does indeed appear that it's been a very long time since someone's been here. By the way, this cloud city seems to be quite an important one to your 13 heavenly cloud races. I've heard that even the Grand Elder of your myriad ancient race has arrived there." "Oh, you're aware of this as well?" fellow Daoist Han? He, not only is Cloud City the third largest city in the 13 heavenly cloud races, it's also been constructed in a very unique manner, so it's quite a renowned city. It's also the closest major city to the army deployed by the Jiao Kai race, and when the true battle finally commences, Cloud City will be the place where all of the powerful beings of our 13 races will gather, Jiao Qianmu explained with a smile. That's good to hear. The city must be quite a big one for it to be so renowned. I just so happen to be looking for a large city so I can do some things, Han Li replied in an indifferent manner. I have a temporary cave abode in Cloud City, so I'm technically half a landlord there. If you have something you need to do, just come and find me. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to help you with any overly important tasks, but I should be able to lend you a hand if you're just running a few errands here and there, Jiao Qianmu offered. After witnessing Han Li slay several beings of the same cultivation base as himself so easily, Jiao Qianmu had naturally already deduced that Han Li was no ordinary upper race being. As such, even though he had already escaped from the area under the control of the Jiao Kai race, he still wanted to try and befriend Han Li. Thank you for your kind offer, fellow Daoist Jiao. Perhaps I really will require your assistance with some matters. Han Li made no effort to turn down Jiao Qianmu's proposal. Cloud City is currently in quite a sensitive state at the moment, so it won't be easy for beings outside of the 13 heavenly cloud races to enter the city. In particular, it'll be difficult to request entry for new faces like you. However, I've seen you slay several upper race Jiao Kai beings, so I can certainly vouch for you. But then again, things will obviously be made a lot easier if you join our myriad ancient race. How about you become a guest member of our race? I have some speaking rights in our myriad ancient race, and I can directly recommend you to our elders. With your powers, you'll definitely be held in high regard by our race. On top of that, the benefits you'll receive from becoming a guest member of our race are quite exorbitant. If you want to get something done in Cloud City, it'll be a lot easier for you as a guest member of the myriad ancient race, Jiao Qianmu chuckled. Thank you for the offer, Brother Jay, but I can't guarantee that I'll be staying in Cloud City for long, so I'll consider this matter another time, Han Li replied after a brief pause. That's true, we should focus on getting to Cloud City first and consider these matters later. I have a few close friends in the city that I can introduce you to when we get there, Jiao Qianmu said in a warm and inviting manner. Han Li nodded in response, but didn't say anything in reply. Thus, the two of them strode out of the teleportation formation and rushed toward the gates of the hall. After pushing open the gates, a blue stone passageway was revealed to them, and the passageway led upward in a winding manner. Han Li and Jiao Qianmu instantly transformed into two streaks of light that disappeared into the passageway in a flash. Moments later, a ball of white light and a streak of azure light flew out of a large mountain, then hurtled into the distance. Chapter 1583, Cloud City. This is Cloud City. Han Li hovered in midair as he looked up into the sky with a peculiar look on his face. Indeed. As the name suggests, Cloud City is one of two floating inhabitable lands in the spirit realm alongside Sky Island. It can't drift with the wind like Sky Island does, but it's able to adjust its own altitude as the seasons change during the year, Jiao Qianmu introduced in a proud manner. At this moment, the two of them were situated on the summit of a small mountain, and several hundred kilometers in the air above them was a giant floating city. The city was hundreds of thousands of feet up in the air, and not only were there white clouds swirling all around it, the entirety of the island was constructed from some kind of unknown white material. For a city of such a massive size to be hovering so high up in the air was truly quite awe-inspiring to anyone witnessing such a spectacle for the first time. Another noteworthy feature as the dozen or so massive pristine white balls around the entire city. The balls didn't appear to be very large from afar, but if one were to draw closer, they'd discover that these were colossal objects that were over 100,000 feet in diameter. As for the exact number of these massive balls, that was something that Han Li couldn't yet ascertain as he could only see one side of Cloud City. What are those things? Following his initial stunned stupor, Han Li pointed up at the massive balls up above with an expression of awe and curiosity on his face. Those are one of the city's defensive trump cards, and they were constructed by our myriad ancient race in conjunction with the stone cocoon race after much painstaking effort. You'll be able to learn the specific details about them once you ask around a little in Cloud City. For now, allow me to keep you in the dark." Jiao Qianmu chuckled with a mysterious smile. Han Li was rather speechless upon hearing this. However, he had no intention of trying to force an answer out of Jiao Qianmu. As such, he rose up into the air, flying toward Cloud City with a hint of curiosity in his heart. Jiao Qianmu also followed close behind him as a streak of white light. From several hundred kilometers, one couldn't develop an accurate grasp of just how massive Cloud City was. However, after reaching within 50 kilometers of the city, even Han Li was flabbergasted by its gargantuan size despite his vast wealth of experience. At such close quarters, Cloud City seemed to have obscured most of the entire sky, and along the way, they began to witness foreign beings flying through the air as streaks of light, or aboard carriages, arks, and all types of flying treasures. As they approached the city, the number of foreign cultivators they encountered also steadily increased. When Han Li was close enough to catch a clear glimpse of the giant ball directly up ahead of him, the surrounding area was already filled with countless foreign beings traveling in all directions. For some reason, all of them skirted around the giant balls, resigning themselves to traveling a larger distance rather than passing by close to them. Han Li narrowed his eyes upon seeing this, and blue light flashed deep within his pupils, allowing him to inspect the giant balls in greater detail. The colossal balls seemed to have been constructed from the same material as Cloud City itself, but upon closer inspection, he discovered that there were faint cracks running all over the seemingly smooth surfaces of these balls. It was as if they were three-dimensional jigsaw puzzles that had been created using countless pieces of material fragments. Almost every single piece of materials had golden and silver runes shimmering on their surfaces, giving the balls an extremely mysterious appearance. Han Li's brows furrowed as he swept his spiritual sense toward the massive ball up ahead, only for it to be repelled by a powerful restrictive power as soon as it came into contact with the ball. Han Li didn't find this to be strange. Instead, he'd be quite surprised if he could glean the internal structure of such a mysterious object so easily. If you're carrying any metallic treasures or materials, make sure not to go within a 10,000 feet distance of those balls. Otherwise, everything of a metallic nature that you're carrying will be forcibly taken and devoured by those things. On top of that, Cloud City won't hand out any reparations for the losses incurred as a result of this, Jiao Qianmu cautioned. Is that so? Han Li was quite surprised to hear this. He glanced at the beings around him who were cautiously avoiding the giant balls, and he was already almost fully convinced that Jiao Qianmu was telling the truth. Shifting his gaze elsewhere, Han Li discovered that there were many beings flying toward a massive city gate of Cloud City. There were several tens of guards wearing the suits of armor at the city gate, and all of them were standing on either side of the gate with serious expressions on their faces, conducting examinations on all beings that intended to enter the city. These thorough examinations were only aimed at cultivators looking to enter the city, while those leaving the city were completely ignored. All of the guards were covered head to toe in suits of armor, but it was quite apparent that they were all of different shapes and sizes, and seemed to hail from different races. Han Li's eyes narrowed upon seeing this, but he continued onward, and after a short while, he arrived at the city gate along with Jiao Qianmu. There were a dozen or so other beings that also descended at this moment, and all of them seemed to be preparing to undergo examination. The so-called examination merely consisted of several guards holding strange-looking discs and scanning them over the unfamiliar faces that were trying to enter the city. At the same time, another being was holding another object, recording some things into that object while listening to the verdicts delivered by his companions. No light barriers or restrictions of that nature could be seen in the air above Cloud City. However, the sky was completely clear without anyone daring to try and fly over the city walls that were thousands of feet tall. On this occasion, Jiao Qianmu didn't explain anything. Instead, he merely smiled and suddenly made his way directly toward the guards at the city gate. In the process, he was jumping the line, and all of the beings ahead of him were naturally quite displeased by his actions. However, most of these beings were only at the foundation establishment stage or core formation stage. Hence, all of them hurriedly put away their enraged expressions after discovering with their spiritual sense that Jiao Qianmu was an upper race being. The beings in the line didn't dare to do anything, but that didn't apply to the guards at the city gates, and all of them immediately turned to Jiao Qianmu with cold expressions on their faces. These guards all possessed comparable or even superior cultivation bases to Jiao Qianmu, yet he remained completely unflustered as he swept a sleeve through the air. A palm-sized black badge instantly flew forth from within, heading directly toward one of the guards. The guard faltered initially upon seeing this, but he quickly recomposed himself before catching the badge and focusing his gaze on it. At the same time, Jiao Qianmu's lips tremored slightly, and even though he wasn't saying anything, it was quite clear that he was using a voice transmission technique. The scenes that unfolded next left all of the beings in the line completely flabbergasted. After catching a clear glimpse of the badge in his hand, an astonished look appeared on the guard's face, and after hearing Jiao Qianmu's voice transmission, he hurriedly stepped forward to return Jiao Qianmu's badge to him with both hands. He then extended a respectful bow, and said, "Greetings, Master Jiao of the Myriad Ancient Race, please come in. The elders of the Myriad Ancient Race have instructed us well in advance to take you to the Heavenly Dawn Pavilion to see them as soon as you arrive. Seeing as we can't eliminate the possibility that there could be Jiao Kai race spies in the city, we'll be sending a few guards to accompany you to the Heavenly Dawn Pavilion." "Oh, the elders are already in the Heavenly Dawn Pavilion? I was going to go and see them anyway. As for guards, don't worry about it. With fellow Daoist Han to accompany me, I'll be fine as long as I don't get attacked by body integration stage beings. Fellow Daoist Han isn't a heavenly cloud being, so prepare a free identity badge of the highest level for him. I can personally vouch for him," Jiao Qianmu commanded as he accepted his badge from the guard. "Yes, Master Jiao." The guard faltered slightly upon hearing this before immediately nodding in response. At this moment, Han Li also strode over in an unhurried manner. The guards instantly waved the discs in their hands toward him, and Han Li sensed a burst of extremely faint spiritual pressure erupt from the strange round discs. Immediately thereafter, several bursts of spiritual sense emanated from the guards' bodies before combining as one, then sweeping toward Han Li's body. A hint of surprise appeared in Han Li's eyes. This was the first time that he had seen a technique that allowed the spiritual sense of several people to be combined as one. As expected of one of the core cities of the 13 heavenly cloud races, even the guards at the city gates were capable of using such an incredible secret technique. After examining Han Li's cultivation base, all of the guards were filled with a sense of awe and veneration. 7th-tier upper race beings were quite rare, even among the 13 heavenly cloud races. The guards were all quite relieved after verifying that their discs hadn't detected any Jiao Kai race bloodline within Han Li's body, and one of them said, "Senior, seeing as Master Jiao is vouching for you and you've passed our preliminary examination, we'll be issuing you a high-grade identity badge right away. With this badge, you'll be able to go anywhere in Cloud City aside from a few secret and forbidden areas." "Thanks for your hard work," Han Li replied in a benevolent manner. The deity transformation stage guard hurried, waved his hands in response, and no longer mentioned anything about sending guards to accompany Jiao Qianmu. It was quite clear that in his mind, a 7th-tier upper race being like Han Li was more than enough to ensure Jiao Qianmu's safety. Moments later, the guards refined a jade badge that contained some basic information about Han Li before handing it over to him. After that, the guards all stepped aside to open up a path between them, and Jiao Qianmu strode into the city with Han Li following behind him in an unhurried manner. Fellow Daoist Jiao, what kind of secret technique did they use just then to combine their spiritual sense as one? Wouldn't such an extraordinary technique be extremely effective in battle? Han Li suddenly asked after they'd entered the city. Chapter 1584, The Heavenly Cloud Races. That's the spirit condensing technique. It is indeed quite an extraordinary secret technique created by the Azure race, but a strict set of prerequisites must be satisfied before the technique can be cultivated. Not only do the cultivators involved have to be brothers related by blood, their cultivation arts and cultivation bases also have to be extremely closely matched before they can unleash this technique. In contrast with all of the other heavenly cloud races, most Azure beings are born as conjoined siblings, where it's quite common even for 6 or 7 siblings to be conjoined as a single being. However, after they grow up a little, they'll be able to split up, and Azure beings are stationed at all 4 city gates of Cloud City to conduct examinations on all those seeking to enter the city. After unleashing their spirit condensing technique, Even beings of a far superior cultivation base to theirs wouldn't be able to hide anything from them, Jiao Qianmu explained with a smile. Han Li was a little disappointed to hear this, but he then decided that it certainly couldn't hurt to reference such an extraordinary technique as that could assist him in his own cultivation. With that in mind, he said, "I see. Looks like my knowledge is rather lacking. I really am quite interested in that technique, though. Would you happen to know how to cultivate it, fellow Daoist? The Azure race holds the spirit condensing technique in extremely high regard, so there won't be many copies of the cultivation method circulating outside their race. However, I should be able to find a way to get my hands on a copy. If you really want one, I'll get someone to secure a copy for you," Jiao Qianmu replied. "You have my thanks, fellow Daoist Jiao," Han Li said with a smile as he cupped his fist in a salute. "Ha ha, don't mention it. You saved my life, so this is the least I can do. I have to go and visit the elders of our myriad ancient race, so I won't be able to accompany you any longer. This is the location of my cave abode. You can come and visit in a few days for the sentient puppet I promised you earlier. Truth be told, I only have 2 or 3 puppets of such a high caliber in my cave abode, and I have to secure approval from the elders before I can give one away to an outsider. However, rest assured, I have some status in the myriad ancient race, so I'll definitely be granted approval with no issues," Jiao Qianmu said with a smile as he handed over a stone tablet to Han Li. At this point, the two of them had already arrived in the city. Up ahead was a wide street that was lined with shops on both sides and filled with different types of beings. It wasn't exactly lively and bustling, but it certainly wasn't a ghost town, either. Han Li accepted the stone tablet and inspected its contents in a cursory manner using spiritual sense, then smiled as he replied, "All right, I also have some matters to take care of, so let's part ways here." Cloud City is not just inhabited by heavenly cloud beings, but also many foreign beings as well, some of whom have stayed here for thousands of years. As such, aside from some temporary dwellings, there are also cave abodes available to be rented. The rental fees are very high, but seeing as you're not planning to stay here for long anyway, those costs shouldn't be an issue to you. Also, make sure that you don't fight anyone or use your spiritual power in the city for no good reason. Otherwise, if you're caught doing so by the restrictions in the city, you'll be banished if you're lucky, and in worst-case scenarios, you could even have your cultivation base completely disabled. Even the elders of our 13 heavenly cloud races have to abide by this rule. All right, that's enough rambling from me. I'll be taking my leave now. After delivering some final words of caution, Jiao Qianmu turned and departed. Han Li looked on as Jiao Qianmu hailed a spirit carriage that was being drawn by a pair of deer-like spirit beasts, then got onto the carriage and traveled away. Only then did he withdraw his gaze before carefully appraising his surroundings. This place really did live up to its status as one of the major cities of the 13 heavenly cloud races. Not only were there countless buildings lining the streets here, all of them were of different styles, and there were virtually no 2 buildings that were exactly the same. Some of these buildings were mountainous structures over 1,000 feet tall, while others were only several tens of feet tall, yet all of them were extremely intricately crafted. Some of them were quite square and angular, resembling the pavilions often seen in the human race. Some were like giant trees that were shimmering with green light. It didn't take long for Han Li to become extremely intrigued by this city. As the name suggested, the 13 heavenly cloud races were comprised of 13 different races, yet ever since countless years ago, they'd lived together in harmony, advancing and coexisting as a single entity. If it weren't for the fact that they were objectively different beings with different bloodlines, they could almost be seen as one massive race. None of the 13 heavenly cloud races were anywhere near powerful enough to face a colossus like the Jiao Kai race on their own, but their combined powers were comparable with the top races of the spirit realm. This was why the 13 heavenly cloud races had managed to exist up to this point, despite their close proximity to the territory of the Jiao Kai race. In reality, battles would break out on the borders between the Jiao Kai race and the heavenly cloud races quite regularly. Either the Jiao Kai race took over some more of the heavenly cloud race's territory, or the latter recovered some of their lost land. Of course, under most circumstances, the Jiao Kai race still came out on top. However, the 13 heavenly cloud races were constantly backing up one another, so they hadn't suffered any decisive losses. As such, the heavenly cloud races weren't surprised by the sudden attack from the Jiao Kai race. Instead, they were able to react quickly and calmly, gathering up their powerful beings in preparation to deal their enemies a heavy retaliative blow. This information had all been disclosed whether intentionally or unintentionally by Jiao Qianmu during their conversations on the way here. According to Jiao Qianmu, the heavenly cloud races had quite a vast territory, and the Jiao Kai race wasn't the only powerful neighbor. There was also the night race, which was not inferior in power to the 13 heavenly cloud races, as well as the slightly weaker explosion race. Of course, there were also many small races in the nearby area, but the only way for them to survive was to join one of the more powerful races. Otherwise, they would either be completely wiped out or forced to find another home far away. This gave Han Li a general understanding of the situation surrounding the races in this area. At present, he was examining the streets in the city while slowly advancing and contemplating about what he was going to do next. His target was undoubtedly to find a teleportation formation that could take him back to the Qian Yuan continent. However, there was no way that a single being could own a teleportation formation of such a high caliber. Instead, it was most likely under the control of a certain major power. In that case, he had no choice but to liaise with the higher-ups of that major power if he wanted to use their teleportation formation. This was why he hadn't rejected Jiao Qianmu's invitation to Cloud City. However, he was going to make up his mind about whether he was going to approach the higher-ups of the heavenly cloud races after he had gathered enough information. His top priority now was to find a place to stay in the city, then slowly search for some leads. Having made up his mind, Han Li no longer hesitated any further. He glanced at the shops around him, then picked one to visit that was similar in its design to a human pavilion. The shop wasn't very large and only had 2 levels. From the wares being sold on the shelves, it appeared that this was a very ordinary general store. The shopkeeper was a green-skinned being who was sitting on a chair behind the counter, and he immediately rose to his feet with a smile on his face at the sight of Han Li. "What can I help you with, Senior? We sell several types of specialty local products from Cloud City, as well as maps, general appliances." This foreign being appeared to be in his 40s, and even though he was only at the foundation establishment stage, he displayed no fear in the presence of Han Li. After extending a polite salute, he launched into a well-rehearsed spiel to advertise his wares. This wasn't particularly surprising. After all, at his lowly cultivation base, he most likely couldn't even tell the difference between a nascent soul and spatial tempering cultivator. Furthermore, there were countless beings who were far more powerful than him in Cloud City, so he was most likely already accustomed to being in the presence of beings that were unfathomably powerful to him. Han Li glanced at the shopkeeper before suddenly sweeping a sleeve through the air. A mid-grade spirit stone flew out from within as he said, "Get me the most detailed map of Cloud City you have. On top of that, I also have some things that I want to inquire about." The shopkeeper's smile immediately widened with elation as he caught the spirit stone, and he brought over a red stone tablet from one of the shelves in the shop as he said, "This is the best map in my store, and I'll be sure to answer your questions to the best of my abilities, Senior." A short while later, Han Li emerged from the shop with a calm expression on his face. He hailed a beast-drawn carriage on the street, then gave the driver an address before closing his eyes to meditate in the carriage. The driver immediately spurred on the beast-drawn carriage to rush down the street. 4 hours later, after passing through countless streets, the carriage finally carried Han Li to the nearest corner of the Cloud City and stopped in front of a strange massive building. Han Li tossed a few spirit stones over to the driver before disembarking from the carriage and looking up at the building in a calm manner. This was a tall hill-like building that had been entirely constructed from a yellow sand-like material. The building was over 10,000 feet, countless times taller than the other buildings nearby. Furthermore, there were several tens of rooms of different sizes littered all over the building, and the occasional being could be seen drifting in and out of the doors. This was like a giant wasp's net when appraised from afar. Han Li stood on the spot in a slight stupor for a long while before finally casting his gaze downward at a large wide-open entrance at the base of the building. There was a strange character inscribed on the wall on either side of the entrance, and even with the vast number of foreign languages that Han Li had mastered, he was completely unable to decipher what those characters meant. Following a brief hesitation, Han Li stroked his chin before striding toward the entrance. After making his way into the building, he found himself in an extraordinarily spacious hall. The hall was over 2,000 feet in size, and the walls and ground were all paved with beautiful green jade. There were also rows of flower pots that were several feet tall positioned along the walls, and within those pots were planted all types of vibrant spirit flowers and spirit herbs. At the center of the hall was a dilapidated black wooden table, on top of which was sprawled a man with snowy white hair in a set of long gray robes. The man was lying there in a completely motionless manner, seemingly in a deep slumber. Han Li made his way over to the table and said, "Find me one of your more secluded rooms. I want to stay here for a few days." Chapter 1585. Encountering an Acquaintance. Han Li's voice wasn't very loud, but it was like a loud thunderclap in the elderly man's ears, and he was instantly jerked awake.
"Ah, welcome.
"I'll find a room for you right away, senior." The elderly man shuddered before sitting bolt upright, then hurriedly pulling out a shimmering white treasure that bore the appearance of an accounts book and quickly searching through it. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this. This elderly man was a cultivator as well, so why he so unalert? It appeared that he wasn't pretending earlier and really had fallen asleep. Just as these thoughts were running through his mind, he cast a glance at the elderly man's face, upon which his expression changed drastically, and he exclaimed, Your senior martial brother Xiong. Why are you here?" The sickly old man was none other than the Xianxia, who had entered the spatial node in the human world ahead of Han Li. His soul lamp had been snuffed out along with those of Old Devil Hu, Eccentric Wind, and the others not long after they'd entered the spatial node, so he should be dead. That was why Han Li was so stunned to see him alive here. The elderly man abruptly faltered upon hearing Han Li's words, and only after a short while did he slowly raise his head to look up at Han Li. "Junior Martial Brother Han, it really is you," the elderly man murmured with a peculiar expression that was caught somewhere between a smile and a grimace. "Yes, it's me. Why are your cultivation base and aura so?" Han Li swept his spiritual sense towards Xianxia, upon which a confused look appeared on his face. Xianxia had been a deity transformation cultivator even back in the human world, yet his cultivation base had since regressed to the core formation stage, and his aura was extremely feeble, as if his body had sustained severe damage. Xianxia stared blankly at Han Li for a long while before a thought suddenly seemed to have occurred to him, and he hurriedly rose to his feet as he said, "Junior Martial Brother, you also came to the spirit realm through a spatial node, right? You seem to have progressed significantly in your cultivation as well. This is not the place to talk. There won't be any customers anytime soon anyway, so come with me and we'll talk elsewhere." He then led Han Li toward a door situated on the side of the hall, and Han Li hesitated momentarily before following along. After entering through the door, the two of them arrived in a long corridor, on either side of which a series of exotic plants were growing. Hu Qinglei didn't let Han Li very far before pushing open a nearby stone door and inviting Han Li into the room. "Take a seat, Junior Martial Brother. Never would I have thought that I'd see you again in my life. In my current state, I'm almost too embarrassed to be in your presence." Xianxia chuckled with a wry smile as they both took a seat. His voice was very dejected and sullen, and he seemed to only be a shadow of his former self. "What happened to you in the spatial node all those years ago? Are the other two still alive?"
Xianxia.
Eccentric Wind and Old Devil Who both died. "We were extremely unlucky and encountered multiple spatial storms along the way. On the last occasion, 2 spatial storms stacked on top of one another, and I was the only survivor among us 3. However, I'd lost almost all of my cultivation base from unleashing too many secret techniques in quick succession in order to save myself. What little cultivation base I have now is a result of many years of arduous cultivation." Xianxia sighed in a resigned manner. "The spatial node was indeed an extremely perilous place, so the fact that you survived is very much a silver lining on an otherwise dark cloud. However, the soul lamp that you'd left in the human world had already snuffed out, and why are you here on the Thunder Continent as opposed to in human territory?"
Xianxia.
"My soul lamp was most likely snuffed out due to the secret techniques I used to save myself. The after effects from using those secret techniques left me in such a terrible condition that I was as good as dead. As for why I'm here on this continent, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. I was able to barely survive the spatial storms that I encountered, but as soon as I emerged from the spatial node, I ended up here. If I hadn't been saved by someone, I wouldn't even be alive right now. From the sounds of it, You ended up in the human territory of the spirit realm after emerging from the spatial node. In that case, I can only assume that the spatial storms blew me completely off course. There was still a hint of lingering fear in Xianxia's eyes as he recalled his horrific experiences in the spatial node, even after so many years had passed. Han Li merely nodded without giving a reply this time. Why are you here doing this kind of job, Senior Marshal Brother Xiong? Have you thought about returning to the human race? Han Li asked with a serious expression. The owner of this inn is a stone cocoon being, and he's the one who saved my life. He's quite kind-hearted and also quite powerful. He also seems to have some status in the stone cocoon race, and I decided to look after his inn for him to repay him for his kindness, and also because I have nowhere else to go. As for returning to the human race, I'd already given up on that dream long ago. There is indeed a teleportation formation under the control of the 13 heavenly cloud races that could facilitate teleportation to other continents, but it's said that an enormous amount of spirit stones is required to activate the formation each time, and just that expenditure alone is enough to force a holy race being of all their wealth. Even if I were to return to the height of my powers, I'd still be far from entitled to use the formation. Besides, even if I were to teleport to the Qianyuan continent, in my current state, there's no chance for me to pass through the primordial world to travel to human territory. On top of that, there's no chance for me to ever reach the spatial tempering stage, so I'm planning to spend the rest of my life here, Xianxia replied with a forlorn shake of his head. Han Li didn't know how to comfort him after hearing that. By the way, I haven't heard about your experiences yet. Even though I can't return to the human race, I still want to hear about how us humans are doing in the spirit realm. Can you tell me about that, Junior Marshal Brother Han? Xianxia asked. There's not much to show and tell in terms of my experiences. After reaching the deity transformation stage, I also traveled to the spatial node according to the coordinates you sent me, and I ventured into it along with the Ice Phoenix, who had also reached the deity transformation stage by then. I was quite lucky in that even though I also encountered spatial storms, I was able to emerge largely unscathed with the assistance of the Ice Phoenix's spatial abilities. As for the current situation that the human race is in, I can't say that we're thriving. At most, we're just barely able to get by. As for the specifics, Han Li gave a brief recount of his own experiences, but refrained from disclosing the fact that he'd also once completely lost his cultivation base. As for the matters surrounding the human race, there was nothing strictly confidential anyway, so Han Li was happy to disclose the current situation to Xianxia. So we have 3 territories and a large number of body integration cultivators among our ranks. In that case, I can breathe a sigh of relief. Xianxia listened intently to Han Li's story before heaving a long sigh. Han Li fell silent again for a short while before suddenly asking, is there really a super teleportation formation in the 13 heavenly cloud races? How did you hear about this, Senior Marshal Brother Xiong? Do you intend to use the teleportation formation as well? It's not really a confidential matter. Not only is there one in the 13 heavenly cloud races, the Jiaokai race and the Night race also have one each. Among the major races in this area, only the Explosion race is apparently yet to construct one. Teleportation formations capable of teleporting beings between continents are only accessible to beings at or above the body integration stage, and you're not a heavenly cloud being, either, so it's going to be very difficult for you to secure approval to use the formation. Thankfully, the 13 heavenly cloud races aren't too xenophobic toward foreign beings, so you should just settle and cultivate here. You'll be able to keep me company then. You can consider returning to the human race after progressing to the body integration stage. By the way, what's your cultivation base at the moment? I can sense that you're far more powerful than you were back in the human world, but I'm unable to detect your exact cultivation base, Xianxia mused with a curious look on his face. I'll have to think about the teleportation formation later, but at present, I've fortunately been able to progress to the spatial tempering stage. Han Li made no effort to hide his cultivation base. The spatial tempering stage? You really have been progressing extremely quickly, Junior Marshal Brother Han. In that case, you no longer have to worry about the limitations of a lifespan, Xianxia sighed in an envious manner upon hearing this. Technically, I'm immortal, but with the major heavenly tribulation that strikes me one every 3,000 years, my worries are certainly far from over. Each successive heavenly tribulation will be fiercer than the previous one, and I'll eventually die anyway unless I can ascend to the true immortal realm, Han Li said with a faint smile. That's not the same thing. After reaching the spatial tempering stage, you'll have thousands of years between heavenly tribulations, so you'll be able to take your time in your cultivation. With your brilliant aptitude, who's to say you won't be able to ascend to the true immortal realm in the end? Xianxia chuckled with a shake of his head. Our human and demon races have had no lack of freakish prodigies, yet how many of them have managed to ascend to the true immortal realm in the end? I'm only focusing on taking my cultivation one step at a time, rather than looking ahead too far and being overly ambitious, Han Li said with a wry smile. Let's discuss this matter at another time. I have to look after the inn for now, and I'll come to your room tonight for a more in-depth chat. You wouldn't refuse to see me, would you, Junior Marshal Brother Han? Xianxia chuckled. Of course not. I've only just arrived in Cloud City, so I also have some things that I need to ask you about. Han Li nodded in response. Thus, Xianxia picked out a relatively secluded room for Han Li to stay in before returning to the hall. Han Li set up a restriction within the room, then sat down in a cross-legged manner and fell into deep thought. The fact that he'd encountered Xianxia here forced him to reconsider some things.